United States Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana was speaking to Mark Carney, or speaking to Canadians in general. And there was an interesting message in what he said to us. And I wanted to show Canadians a couple of things. One, that even though you're a high ranking member of the government, you might not necessarily be good at math. And two, he has a sentiment that I share. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. I'm your host. Before I get into this, I would like to encourage all of you to share these videos with people, especially people who might be suffering a lot of anxiety because of the political situation in Canada and the economic situation in Canada. Sharing my videos might help them to at least find a new source of information. If they're constantly listening to the CBC, the CTV, if every time they look for news, Google only shows them the same 3 news sites, then clearly they might want to look for alternative sources of information. Also, don't forget that I'll be leaving a link to the video where I got this in the description. As I was saying, Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, who is apparently not any relation to the Kennedy that Canadians might be aware of, was talking about the tariff situation with Canada. And he specifically mentions Mark Carney by name, calls him Prime Minister Carney and all of the rest of that. And I suppose technically, and who knows, right? All of the left have now gotten behind one individual. We might as well just dissolve the NDP and dissolve the bloc if everybody's simply going to vote for the Liberal, and we can run a 2-party system in Canada. Senator Kennedy was talking about the tariffs, as I said, and he has an interesting take on them. And I thought you would enjoy seeing it before I tell you why it's flawed.
Canada and the United States of America do a lot of business with each other. In 2024, the United States sold to the people of Canada about $350 billion in goods. It's a lot of goods, $350 billion. Canada sold Canadian goods to the United States in the amount of $412 billion. So there's what we call a trade deficit of $63 billion. The U.S. economy is 10 times bigger than the Canadian economy. And the population of the United States of America is 8 times bigger than the population of Canada. Now, the United States is 8 times bigger, and our economy is 10 times larger than Canada's. But yet Canada is selling more of its goods into the United States than the United States is selling into Canada. Any fair-minded person would have to conclude, Mr. President, that it's because of tariffs. It's because the Canadian tariffs on American goods are higher than the American tariffs on Canadian goods. Is 8 times smaller than you are. And in terms of population, it's 10 times smaller than you are. And your neighbor is selling $63 billion more in goods to you than you're selling to them. That seems kind of unfair.
Okay, everybody, you need to take a lesson from this. You need to understand that just because you get elected to office doesn't necessarily mean that you're good at math. Now, I will discuss all of that in a second. The first thing I'd like to show you is this little random AI piece of information from Google, where it says in 2023, Canada's crude oil exports to the United States were valued at approximately $124 billion. I'll say that again. In 2023, Canada's crude oil exports to the United States were valued at approximately $124 billion, representing a significant portion of Canada's total exports and a substantial share of U.S. crude oil imports. So if we want to look at who's got a trade deficit going which direction, and we were to take out the $124 billion in oil, you would see that actually you give us $64 billion more. The trade deficit goes the other way. But you know what, Senator Kennedy, you know what, audience, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, because I want to give everyone listening to this conversation some sort of scale and scope and a perspective that apparently is lost even in the highest halls of one of our great continent. So let's just leave the oil out of it. Let's just take the numbers at face value. Let's just say that it's, a $63 billion deficit going the other way, going the other direction. So if I understand your math, you say your economy is 10 times larger than the Canadian economy, which it's probably closer to 12. There's been a lot of problems in Canada recently. But again, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll call it 10, indicating that you make 10 times the amount of money that I make, right? That the United States of America has 10 times the amount of money that Canada has. So you got more money to spend. Next point, you said that you are 8 times population-wise larger than Canada. And he said he used the number 41 million for Canadian population. So it's roughly, I think he said the States have 330 million. So let's just call it 8 times, right? So now, if I understand you correctly, Senator Kennedy, you have 8 times the population and 10 times the money. And yet somehow, in your math, you feel that we should be on parity for sales. If we take that out and go anywhere else and we just say, okay, you know what? In that city, they have 10 times the population. In this town, they have, a tenth of the population or the money, and all of those numbers were to match out. Which place would you open up a business, Senator Kennedy? Would you open it up in the small place with a tenth of the amount of money and an eighth of the population? Or would you open a business in the place where it's 10 times larger and, 10 times more money and 8 times larger? So what we can agree from that, Senator Kennedy, leaving the oil aside, let's just call your numbers what they are. We'll call them even. We'll call them parity. No problem. However, because you have so much more money and because you are a larger market and because millions of Canadians every year fly to some of your warmest regions, I mean, can you imagine how hard it must be to get ketchup chips in some part of Canada or some parts of the United States, excuse me? Those are the kinds of things that get imported down into Florida and New Mexico and Arizona and even California, as I'm given to understand. But let's leave all of that, let's not harp too closely on the individual products that might be going down just specifically for Canadians that are spending 5-6 months a year in the United States. Let's just concentrate on the fact that you yourself admitted that it's 10 times the amount of money and 8 times the population. And somewhere in Canada, there's a guy making product that says to himself, if I just go and sell it in the States, I'll make a lot more money because there's more of you. So there's more potential customers. It's straight logic. And I'm sure anybody out there right now with even the rudimentary understanding of marketing, sales, and mathematics can hear what I'm saying. Now, I get what he was doing. He's looking at it. He got all national, he got all proud and said, hey, wait a minute, how come this, that, and the other thing? And he finishes up with a stronger idea. So we will come to that here in a moment, which I'll just let you hear it so that then I can let you know my thoughts on the matter. But don't think for 1 second that because they have 10 times the money and 8 times the population and we are barely tipping the scales at $60 billion over, that they aren't getting the better end of the deal, that they aren't selling more of their products in Canada than the other way around. Because it's not an eighth, right? It's not like they're saying, oh, we are now selling 10 times the amount, our money is 10 times larger, the amount that we're taking in. We're not selling you 10 times what you're selling us. It's barely a third more, without calculating in the removal of the crude oil, which then puts us not only on a smaller market, but indicates that you are selling top down more products in Canada than we are selling to you. Now, you're a very nice man. I've listened to you time. You're sharp as a tack most of the time. But the math on this one doesn't support your contention. Because if we were larger than you, you'd be telling that same Mr. President you were speaking to, you'd be saying, hey, why aren't we selling more products in Canada? Because they got more people that we can reach, more people to sell our stuff to.
rather than the Prime Minister of Canada raising tariffs on the United States of America after the United States of America raises tariffs on Canada, which will cause us friends to have a trade war, I would respectfully suggest to the Prime Minister of Carney of Canada that he should reduce tariffs to zero. He should reduce all Canadian tariffs on United States goods to zero. Let's let those good Canadian companies compete with good American companies in selling goods into the United States. And let's let those good American companies compete with those good Canadian companies in terms of selling goods into Canada. And may the best, cheapest product win. That's my respectful challenge to Prime Minister Carney tonight. If you think President Trump's being unfair and is not a free trader, then reduce your tariffs to zero. And ask President Trump to reduce our tariffs to zero on Canada.
Oh, that was great. And I know you're thinking in your mind, why are you laughing, Sterling? That's a horrible thing. That blah, blah, blah. Listen to me. You know what that tells? Mark Carney could never do that. He could never remove the tariff. They have 10 times the population, and they live a lot less expensive than we do. Their houses are cheaper. Their electricity is cheaper. Their heating is cheaper. Their cars are cheaper. Their gas is cheaper. Their food is cheaper. They get more for their bang for their buck than we do. Like when they buy a house, they get a lot more for a lot less. Their dollar is worth a lot more than ours. And Mark Carney or any president wouldn't have to be, the American businessman Mark Carney to know that if you tried to do that, the Canadian industry would be wiped out in an attempt to try to compete with the way that the American can put the product into Canada. I mean, let's be honest, they're already putting $60 billion more into Canada, and that's probably near our breaking point. Now, there are people out there going to try to nitpick me. Don't, because I swear I'm not in the mood for that kind of partisanship. The challenge was extended by the senator because he knows that if we were to reduce the tariffs to zero, the massive behemoth, 10 times the economy, would wash out every competitor inside of this entire country, because he's not foolish. He knows the problems that Canadians face with manufacturing costs. He knows the amount of Canadians that are running down into the United States to try and start businesses because of the ability to pay only 15% tax. And many of them are trying to get there before April 2nd. He knows all of these things when he made the statement. Yeah, his initial math was a bit flawed, but this part here, putting Mark Carney on notice, who keeps saying retaliatory tariffs, like Canadians are going to, get in line and start waving a flag without ever understanding that retaliatory tariffs hurt Canadians. They don't hurt Americans. They have 10 times the economy. And they can produce it for a lot less. So even adding 25%, it might cut into their bottom line a little deeper, but it's only going to come out of your pocket. Now, I'm not recommending that we remove the tariffs completely and turn them down to zero, though certainly on some products I can see the logic. But I am telling you that there is no way in the world. Are you listening to me, Pierre Poilievre and all of his people? Are you listening? Retaliatory tariffs is a bad idea. No retaliatory tariffs. It doesn't matter. Let them crank our stuff up to 1,000,000%. Retaliatory tariffs only indicate that we will harm the Canadian economy. Don't think for one second that we already haven't worked out these deals. Don't think for one second that we don't already know that what can be manufactured in Canada has a tariff on it, and what can't be manufactured in Canada comes in fairly tariff-free. That was hammered out 2 decades ago. They know all that stuff. That's why the softwood lumber that you keep hearing everybody talk about. Well, we've only been arguing about that with the states since the 70s. I think the first time they went to the World Trade, it was 1969. Don't hold me to that, but I know that I remember hearing about it as a teenager. Now, I know you're thinking, but it's not that long ago. And I've been paying attention even when I was, even then. And I'm telling you, the softwood lumber tariffs have been going on for a long, long time because we want to sell our softwood down there, but we have government subsidies and they're like, it's not fair. And so what I'm saying to you is that all of the products that come across the border are already hammered out at tariffs so that they can be competitive with any product that might be manufactured inside of Canada. That's one of the reasons that the car is such a big deal, because they're making them a lot cheaper in China and then they're bringing them into Canada and they're slipping them through the border under the guise of them being manufactured in Canada. Now, I don't want to overload you with trade complications. What I do want you to appreciate is that Mark Carney could never do that, or any sitting prime minister could never do that without losing completely 100% any economic sovereignty that we may possess. But we can absolutely end the trade war in a second. We just don't put any retaliatory tariffs on anything that comes in from the United States. Just leave them at the levels that they're at. Let the Americans run around, go crazy. Let all of our business see what it's going to do. Because sooner or later, Mark Carney's going to have to realize that the only way that we can be competitive is to get rid of the industrial carbon tax, is to get rid of many of the restrictions that are on it. And in a second, even people that are diehard in the wool liberals who've been voting for 3 generations will understand that the math simply doesn't support it. There'll be 4 or 5 liberals who will be making money and they will have power, and the rest of us will be looking through the fence like some sort of dystopian nightmare. The math is the math is the math. And the only thing that you can tell yourself is that we need to get somebody out of the way who's not afraid to put shovels in the ground, who hasn't spent the last 10 years of his life talking about net zero and running around Davos on the, trailing behind the leaders of Davos and being on the board of directors. You have to tell yourself that you have to stop following around this guy whose intentions are not honorable and who is not being completely candid with not only the economic situation, but his desire to impose net zero on any product that Canadians made. And if you listen, you'll hear him say it. Well, we're going to open new markets because we got to have, clean steel to trade into the EU. The EU, they got less money than we do. They're currently in negotiation to try to bring Ukraine into the EU. They are not worried about trading into Canada because the market here is small. Now, Senator Kennedy said 0 tariffs and let's have this, this open, truly free market. But I am telling you to stop telling yourself that you're going to make reciprocal. Don't stop it. Just stop it. The reality is that we're not going to be doing any harm, any good to Canadians by putting reciprocal tariffs on the United States. And the fact of the matter is that if the President Trump puts tariffs on Canadian products, it's only going to shine light on the fact that Canadian businesses can't compete with all of the labor costs, the carbon tax. I mean, it's not like a guy can go to work because his rent's too high. I mean, it is indicative of the entire system being broken. To fix this system, we have to begin at home. We need cheap rent. But I don't want to talk too long about that in this one. I just want you to send this to anybody that'll listen, especially if they're inside of Pierre Poilievre's inner circle. Stop talking from the pulpit like you're going to make reciprocating tariffs. Forget it. You have to keep Canada's lives less expensive, not more expensive. We already give more than we have. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Don't forget to share this video with all of your socials. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.